Welcome, confidential listeners, to another entry from our private archives. This is a space for the unspoken.
To a place where the past isn't just a shadow, but an inheritance etched in blood. Tonight we leave the sun-drenched canals of Italy behind, crossing the black Atlantic in search of an ordinary life in the dusty, hollow heart of the United States. This is the chronicle of Sienna Rossi, a woman who tried to burn her lineage to save her soul. But in certain families, destiny isn't a choice, it's a sentence waiting for midnight to be executed. Titled The Blood Debt of Sienna Rossi, she denied her fate, but the shadows never forgot. So, bolt the windows, turn off the lights, and listen closely, because the audience for this truth is only you.
We came from Italy when I was still a child. My mother, Allegra, carried very little in her luggage, but in her eyes she bore a terror I couldn't yet name. We crossed the ocean to hide in the middle of nowhere, a small, isolated town surrounded by infinite plains in the American Midwest. The sun here was different. It didn't warm you, it only illuminated the dust that seemed to coat the Rossi family secrets. Allegra always said we were different, but not in the way other children were. She forbade me from looking at the full moon and taught me to whisper prayers in ancient dialects that didn't sound like they belonged in any church, prayers that belonged to my grandmother, Nonna Giada. I wanted to be normal. I wanted the city lights, the music on the radio, and a future where Nonna Giada's name wasn't a taboo whispered through clenched teeth. In that small wooden house, far from everything, I thought the ocean had been a wide enough barrier to leave our destiny in Europe. I didn't know that what runs in the veins doesn't need a passport to cross borders, and what was about to wake up inside me wasn't afraid of the distance. As I grew up in that lonely town, the weight of the Giada lineage began to manifest. I saw things before they happened. I smelled the rain hours before the first cloud appeared. Allegra, with trembling hands, tried to teach me to control it, to accept it. But I, Sienna, rebelled. I denied every word, every ritual, every heirloom. I didn't want to be the witch they expected me to be. I remember one specific night when the wind blew so hard it felt like it wanted to rip the house from the ground. Allegra handed me an ancient amulet passed down directly through our Italian bloodline. You cannot run from who you are, Sienna. The blood demands to be heard. If you close the door to the shadows, they will simply climb through the windows. I threw that amulet into the bottom of a dry well that very night. I screamed at the dark sky that I was the master of my own path. I thought that by denying my fate, I would be free. But that was the moment the silence of my nights ended forever. What I didn't understand was that by rejecting the light of my own magic, I was only leaving the hungry shadows in charge. The first few weeks after I threw the amulet into the well, the silence was absolute, deafening even. But then the nights changed. I would wake up at exactly 3 a.m., the witching hour that Allegra used to warn me about, feeling a weight on my chest that had nothing to do with the humid air of the plains. One night, the moon was a silver blade cutting through the curtains. I opened my eyes and saw a figure standing at the foot of my bed.
It was tall, draped in a tattered black lace veil, the kind Nonna Giada wore to funerals back in Italy. It didn't have a face, only a void where features should have been, but I could feel its gaze burning into my skin. I tried to scream, but my throat felt like it was filled with dry corn husks. The shadow didn't move, but the temperature in the room dropped until I could see my own breath. It leaned forward, and a voice, not a human voice, but the sound of dry leaves skittering on a grave, hissed my name. Sienna, you cannot bury what is already dead. I realized then that my rejection hadn't closed a door. It had invited something ancient to come in and sit in the dark with me. When I told Allegra the next morning, she didn't look surprised. She simply gripped her rosary until her knuckles turned white and whispered that the blood debt was calling for its payment. A few days later, a black sedan, coated in the fine red dust of the county roads, pulled up to our gate. A man stepped out. He wasn't from around here. His suit was too sharp, his eyes too observant. He introduced himself as Silas. He had a way of looking at our house and at me that made me feel like an insect under a microscope. Allegra met him at the porch, her hand hidden behind her back, likely clutching a kitchen knife. But Silas didn't look like a threat. He looked like a messenger. Mrs. Rossi, or should I say, Allegra, I've traveled a long way from the old country. Your mother, Giada, sent word before she passed. She said the girl, Sienna, would try to fight the change. She said the girl would need guidance. I stood behind the screen door, my heart hammering against my ribs. Who was this man? How did he know about Nonna Giada's final words? Silas turned his gaze toward the door, looking right through the mesh into my eyes. He smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a hunter who had finally found the trail. He knew I had thrown the amulet away. He knew the shadows were visiting me, and most terrifyingly, he knew that the power I was trying to suppress was starting to rot the very air around us. Silas didn't stay on the porch. He moved into our kitchen, his presence making the walls of our farmhouse feel smaller, more fragile. He sat at the wooden table, the very table where Allegra and I shared silent meals, and began to unspool a history I had been denied. It wasn't just a gift we had fled from in Italy, it was a debt. Nonna Giada hadn't just been a healer in our village, she had been a guardian of a threshold. To keep our family safe during the lean years after the war, she had made a pact with something that lived in the shadows of the Italian mountains. The price? The first daughter of the third generation, Sienna. Your grandmother didn't give you a choice, Sienna. She gave you a way. Your mother, Allegra, thought that by crossing an ocean, she could break a blood-bound contract. But the sea is just water. Blood is the only currency that matters to the things that dwell in the dark. I looked at my mother, waiting for her to deny it, to tell him he was a liar. But Allegra wouldn't look at me. She just stared at her red, chapped hands, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. I realized then that my rebellion was a joke. I wasn't fighting a choice. I was fighting a mortgage on my very soul that had been signed before I was even born. Silas leaned in, his breath smelling of stale tobacco and ancient parchment. The shadows aren't visiting you to scare you, Sienna. They are checking on their property. That night, the visitation wasn't a shadow at the foot of the bed. It was in the room with me, breathing.
I woke up to find the black lace veil draped over my own face. I tore it off, gasping for air, only to see the figure again, but this time it was standing at the mirror. It was wearing Nona Giada's dress, but as it turned around, the veil fell away. It wasn't my grandmother. It was a reflection of me, but distorted. My eyes were pits of black tar, and my skin looked like wet marble. It moved with a jerky, unnatural grace, reaching out a hand that felt like ice against my throat. Why do you fight the skin you were born to wear? You think you are Sienna Rossi, the farm girl, but you are just a vessel. We have been hungry for 70 years, and your blood is the key to the feast. I grabbed a heavy iron candle holder from my nightstand and hurled it at the mirror. The glass exploded, but the figure didn't vanish. It just shattered into 1,000 smaller versions of itself, each one whispering the same thing in my own voice. I ran for the door, but the floorboards turned into sinking sand. I realized the shadow was using the face of my lineage to trick my senses. It wasn't Nona Giada coming to guide me. It was a predator wearing her memory like a costume. As the darkness swirled around me, I felt a surge of something hot and violent in my chest. It was the power I had denied, waking up not to save me, but to fight for its own survival. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The power I had rejected was the only thing keeping the entity from consuming me entirely. But without a focus, it was a wildfire, burning me from the inside out. I needed the amulet. I needed the weight of Nona Giada's silver against my skin, even if it meant embracing the very witchcraft I had loathed. I ran out into the moonless night, the grass snapping like bone under my boots. The dry well stood at the edge of the property, a jagged throat of stone swallowing the earth. I tied a rusted winch rope around my waist and began the descent, the air growing colder and smelling of ancient, stagnant Italian soil. My fingers bled as I clawed through the silt at the bottom. The darkness down there wasn't empty. It was thick, pressing against my lungs like wet wool. I felt a cold, metallic pulse beneath the dirt. My hand closed around the chain, and for a second, the well vanished. I saw the mountains of Italy, saw Nona Giada weeping as she signed a parchment with a drop of her own blood. I pulled the amulet out, and the silver flared with a violet light that screamed in the silence. I wasn't just holding jewelry. I was holding a key to a prison I had built for myself. As I climbed back out, I saw Silas standing at the rim, his silhouette a sharp blade against the pale stars. He didn't help me up. He just watched, his eyes reflecting the purple glow of the relic. I stood on the edge of the well, gasping, the amulet burning a mark into my palm. Silas stepped forward, his shadow stretching across the dead grass until it touched mine. He told me the truth I hadn't wanted to hear. The amulet wasn't just a focus for my power, it was a tether. To unmake the pact, to kill the entity wearing my face, the debt had to be transferred. It couldn't be erased. The entity wants a Rossi woman, Sienna. It doesn't care which one. You have the power now, but you lack the experience to banish it. I can perform the ritual. I can send that thing back to the mountains, but it needs a soul to carry back in your place. Your mother, Allegra, has already offered herself. She thinks her life is a fair trade for your freedom. I looked toward the farmhouse. I could see Allegra through the kitchen window, her head bowed in prayer, her spirit already broken by years of running. Silas reached for the amulet, his hand trembling with a greed he couldn't hide. He didn't want to help me. He wanted to control the debt. He wanted me as his apprentice, a weapon forged in the fires of my mother's sacrifice. In that moment, the prince my mother had brought home, the hope of a guide, revealed himself as the true monster of the story. I gripped the silver chain so hard it cut my skin. If a debt had to be paid, I wasn't going to use my mother's soul. I was going to use his. The air in the cornfield was thick with scent of ozone and rotting vegetation. Silas stood at the center of a scorched circle, his hands raised, chanting in a tongue that made the very earth shiver. Behind him, the entity, the twisted reflection of my own face, loomed like a mountain of smoke. My mother, Allegra, was on her knees, her soul already beginning to fray under the pressure of the debt. But I wasn't the girl who had run from the moon anymore. I stepped into the circle, the silver amulet glowing with a violet light that cut through the darkness like a blade. Silas thought he could use my mother as a shield. He thought I was a child to be molded, but the power Nonajada left me wasn't a curse. It was an inheritance of fire. I didn't direct the energy at the entity. I directed it at the tether Silas was holding. I felt the pact scream as I sheared it in half with a single thought. The entity didn't vanish. It turned its hunger toward the man who had tried to command it. I watched as the shadow swallowed Silas whole, his screams silenced by the very vacuum he had created. I wasn't just a Rossi, I was the end of the debt. When the light faded, the cornfield was silent, the entity was gone, and Silas was nothing but a memory in the dust. I stood over my mother, the amulet cool and heavy in my hand, the weight of 1,000 years finally lifted. The sun rose over the plains the next morning, but it didn't look like the sun I had known. It was bright, warm, and for the first time, it didn't feel like it was revealing my secrets. My mother and I sat on the porch, watching the light hit the old well. The amulet was back around my neck, not as a burden, but as a badge of honor. We didn't go back to Italy. We stayed in that small wooden house, but the silence was no longer a cage, it was a choice. I am Sienna Rossi. I am the granddaughter of Nonna Giada, and I am the woman who broke a pact with the dark. I still see things before they happen, and I still smell the rain before the clouds, but I no longer fear the night. My mother, Allegra, finally sleeps without a rosary in her hand. We found our heaven in the dust of the Midwest, proving that you don't have to run from your blood to be free. You just have to be brave enough to own the shadows it casts. Life in the heart of America is quiet, but it is ours. I look at my mother and I see a woman who is finally, after a lifetime of storms, standing in the sun. I accepted the gift Nonna Giada gave me, and in doing so, I found the only thing that ever truly mattered, a life that is finally mine. And so, the archive of the Rossi lineage is closed. A story of a daughter who found her strength in the very thing she tried to burn, and a mother who was finally allowed to stop running. If this journey through the shadows of the Midwest has touched your heart, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. Help us continue to unbox these profound truths from the secrets inbox. But I have to ask you, confidential listeners, if you were offered a power that came with a price, would you bury it in the dirt, or would you use it to hunt the things that go bump in the night? Share your truth in the comments below. Because in the end, the blood we inherit is only the ink. We are the ones who write the story. Until next time, stay safe and keep your secrets close. Good night.